Hey, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Blind Ambition with Jack Kelly. It's your friend Rick from Blind, and today I'm going to introduce you all to Awa Kone, who's the global head of operations at Flutterwave. Before Flutterwave, Awa was a vice president and regional head of West Africa at Swiss Re, where she spearheaded the reinsurer's expansion into the Ivory Coast. Flutterwave is a payment technology company headquartered in San Francisco and Lagos, Nigeria. Last publicly valued at $3 billion, Flutterwave is Africa's most valuable startup and one of the continent's largest payments providers. Thanks for coming on the show, Awa.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
So I know you've accomplished so much in your career, and I probably didn't do it as much justice as I should have. So just for the audience's benefits, and certainly mine, can you walk us through your career?
Of course. So I actually started out my career as an actuarial consultant. I started out at Towers Perrin, which now is then became Towers Watson, and now they have a new name. But I started out there in the pension industry doing my actuarial work. And then after that, I joined PwC, where I kind of specialized a little bit on variable annuities. I was involved with large insurance companies, looking at variable annuities, fixed annuities. And then at some point, because I am from Africa, I've always had this dream of going back home, becoming an entrepreneur. And I realized that although I really enjoyed the actuarial profession, it was so specialized and so US focused that I wanted to have a broader view in terms of global business, and then also, doing things outside of just this purely technical um, field. And so I left everything, went to get my MBA at the MIT Sloan School of Management. There, I had an opportunity to really expand my network and understanding of how things are done outside of the US, right? Be it Europe or Africa, but very specifically in Africa. So I was involved with the Africa Business Club, for example. I was the president, and we had quite a number of events where we were able to either travel to Africa or bring in the US really influential people. Like one of our guests at our conference was the president of Mauritius, for example. So really, really cool experiences. And then after that, eventually found my way to Swiss Re, or they found me. And for a really cool opportunity to lead their West and Central African operations. And part of it was they were at a point where it was really important for them to localize their operations in Africa to be able to still do business in Africa. And so they were looking for people who were, fantastic professional, but also understood the cultural context of these places. And that's how I ended up there. I lived in Zurich for a couple of years. It was a fantastic experience traveling around the region in the area and opening up the office in Cote d'Ivoire, which is actually where I grew up, where I was born. And then after that, I joined Flutterwave. So I've been with Flutterwave for the last 4 years, thereabout. And when I joined, it was really about transitioning from a smaller startup to more of a scale up, a bigger company, building the operational processes that would support the scale that the company had seen. And that could, stick around for quite a number of years. And so I've been growing the payments operations, the treasury operations for the past 4 years. Yeah.
So that's it's so interesting, and don't take this the wrong way, but here in America, we would hear of Nigeria of like getting an email saying, "Hey, so and so died, and if you just send us this amount of money, you're going to be rich." And now it's becoming an epicenter of tech and finance, right? So is this all throughout Africa? Is it just you're the exception, your company, or what are you seeing? Because I don't know, Rick, if like this is kind of a little alien. So like how robust is it?
Nigeria doesn't have the best reputation, or has not had the best reputation when it comes to fraud and whatnot. However, I'd say that there's a little bit of a rebranding, across every single element of the culture, right? From music to cinema to payment and startup, right? Nigeria is really, really fantastic hub, really good energy, right? If you've ever been, I think some of the big hubs in terms of startup or tech in Africa, Kenya, Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, right? And what I really, really like about what's going on in Nigeria over the past few years is these homegrown leaders and companies, you know, like Flutterwave, like Paystack, who are really charting the way and solving these African problems using African solutions and using African talent, right? So that's one of the things that I was super, super excited about with Flutterwave specifically was here we are actually having an impact and really allowing our people to go beyond what they were, let me just say, limited by because of the lack of payment infrastructure, right? If you are in Nigeria, it's nearly impossible for you as a small business to do business in Ghana, for example, right? Or in another neighboring country. It's that difficult to move money from one country to the next. In fact, it's easier for you to take the cash, get on the plane, or drive to Ghana than to send it via the banking
Wait,
system,
why is that?
right?
That sounds nuts. Why? Like,
It's
what's
insane. It really is insane, right? And so the infrastructure, I'd say, in Africa, and I'm sure in other places as well, was not built around the continent, right? Like the SWIFT system is very much a US system. So in order for us to send USD from one place to the next, it has to come through New York, for example. So when you think about it logically, what sense does it make for me to send money through New York back when it's literally like a 45-minute flight, right? And so there are a lot of these issues that make it impossible for people to grow their business and scale. And those are some of the solutions that our CEO saw and really wanted to bring, you know, some of the problems he saw and wanted to bring solutions to. So yes, Nigeria was not, you know, the best in terms of reputation, but I think things have changed significantly in terms of the level of seriousness and the type of homegrown, really, really cool startups that are, you know, being birthed from that place.
no, just Rick, I'm curious.
I'm
Did
just
you know this? Did you know all about this, or is this kind of new to you as well?
I'm admittedly a bit of a fintech nerd.
Okay.
When I first landed in tech, I worked in credit and loans,
Mhm.
and one of the things that we're trying to do is trying to figure out, like, the financial services fintech is so US centric. What are other folks around the world doing, and what can we
Right.
learn from them?
Mm-hmm.
um like if you go to East Asia, you have these like super apps where you can basically do everything and anything you want in a messenger app. And then obviously in Africa you just have a greater, I would say, adoption in terms of mobile phone usage, right? Where
Absolutely.
seemingly everyone has a mobile phone, and so your ability to get customers to feel comfortable doing financial services on a smartphone is just perhaps more natural than in the West, where you have some mistrust or inaccess to broadband internet or even mobile phones.
Yeah.
Now, I'm curious because I feel like, and I don't mean to put anyone on blast, certainly not our audience, but Africa is a diverse continent, more than 50 countries. When you are trying to expand or do business on such a diverse country with so many different cultures, languages, infrastructure, even within the same single country, um, how do you even approach that? Like, where do you begin?
This is a great question. So I did the expansion work with Swiss Re, not with Flutterwave. Flutterwave, I've been focused on operations, but you're right.
Right.
It's a massive continent, 54 different countries, each one of them with their own rules, with their own regulations, their own culture, their own business culture, right? And so specifically in our case with Swiss Re, it was really about understanding the terrain, right? Because these are places where the cultural context matters quite a lot, right? And I think it's also the same in Asia or in other places in the world where people value face-to-face interactions. People value respect in hierarchies, right? People value understanding not only the letter of the law, but really understanding, what is not written and what is, between the lines, right? And so it's really, really critical to, first of all, understanding the lay of the land, making sure you have friends within said land, and then start right there with those friends who can guide you and making sure that they're introducing you to the right friends such that you can achieve what you need to achieve. But you do need to be very open-minded, and you need to be flexible, right? There were so many instances where we thought we understood everything, we were on the right path, and then only to discover at the last minute that things have changed, right? And in those moments, I think that having that perception that the regulatory environment in Africa is very much evolving as we are also evolving and building a lot of our framework and structures, right? And so you have to have that in mind and keep that in mind, not to go crazy sometimes.
So it sounds like there's a lot of nuance that needs to be understood, not even before you do business, but just over time as you continue to do business in the continent. Can you
Absolutely.
share with us more kind of like a little bit like if I'm in the US and I want to have a startup in Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, whatever it might be in Africa, these emerging tech hubs, what are the nuances that I should know about, even at a base level, before I get started?
That's a really good question. It's a really good question. I think that a lot of times what the two mistakes that people make is, one, to assume that Africa is just the same, right? Um, and then two, coming into Africa with that Western mindset, right? It won't work, right? So for example, if I go to Lagos and I have my US cards and I'm trying to swipe those cards, they will get blocked. Most of them will get blocked, right? Not because I'm doing anything suspicious, I'm just sitting in the restaurant, right? But because of where it's coming from, they would get blocked, for example. And so I'd say that understanding, again, like I always say, that understanding those nuances in each country, right? First of all, who is the regulator in Nigeria, right? Who's the CBN governor? What have they been their stances? What are the main priorities that they have in mind, right? How is the economy driving a lot of what's happening within the regulatory space from a financial services perspective, right? Understanding that, right now, not too long ago, for example, the oil subsidies were removed from Nigerians, right? So you'll see that gas prices have shot up, for example. If now is the time for you to go and start up your enterprise in Nigeria, you need to understand this is a country where people have seen a devaluation. There's crazy inflation. So even as you're putting together your compensation packages, understanding that what you're paying them today may not be worth what they're hoping for tomorrow, right? And so you'll see people starting to give salaries, for example, in USD, right? So really you have to be very tactical and understanding of the lay of the land, and then making sure that that's very much part of the way in which you do business, right? So understanding that with the way in which the currency has been devalued, for example, it might change flows of funds in and out of the country, right? So if you are intending to repatriate all of your funds as a business on a monthly basis, do you have the right partners to do that? Right? And would that money even be worth what you were hoping for a month from now? So,
Wait,
so I'd
Awa,
say,
if you don't mind, how bad is it when you talk about this? Because the way you're describing it, is inflation, what, 10%? Is it like how, and the
no.
devaluation, how?
The inflation, I think, is definitely well over 20. I think it's not just Nigeria, right? A couple of people in Africa where there's been quite high inflation as well. The Nigerian currency has been notoriously quite volatile
Hmm.
the last few years. When I started going to Nigeria about, let me say, maybe 6 years ago, it was $1 to about 350 naira. Right now we're about $1 to 1,200, 1,300. So that just gives you a sense of how much the currency has devalued over that short amount of time, right? Not to say that the opportunities are not there, right? Of course, I was trained as an actuary, and I think the slogan of the Society of
Right.
Actuaries is risk is opportunity. So there is opportunities, a lot of opportunities in those things, right? But you just need to understand how the opportunities can be properly taken advantage of.
Now, is this the same in all different countries in Africa, or is it centered in just a few of them, where everyone's going through the same thing?
No, it's not the same, right? And this is also where I was saying around it's a massive continent, right?
Hmm.
So you will see, for example, some of the French-speaking countries, the ZOF, for example, which is pegged to the euro. You won't necessarily see that massive inflation in those countries
Mm.
because of that, right? Which is very different than what you may experience, for example, in Nigeria or in Kenya. So each country is very, very different. The opportunities and the challenges are also very different across the continent.
Would you advise people who are, let's say, watching this, who are interested in entrepreneurial endeavors, to start doing business or do a startup in Africa, even with the things you're saying with high inflation and devaluation of currency? Is it still worth?
Absolutely. Absolutely, right? So when people were making negative interest in Europe or 0.05 in the
Mhm.
US, you're making, 5% Nigeria, for example, right? So the opportunities are absolutely there, right? And like I said, you have to understand how to take full advantage of those opportunities, and you have to come in with the right mindset, right? So if you're looking at the way in which things are set up in the West, for example, you're not going to get that type of return on investments here, right? You will get it in Africa if you're able to manage appropriately, right? The challenges, you're able to manage yourself and really understand how business is done, because that's key, right? You're not going to be able to sit here, send emails and expect that, everything will be perfect. No, you need to be on the ground. You need to roll up your sleeve. You need to make the right friends. You need to hustle a little bit, right? And you just get in there. And so from that perspective, I'd say it's a massive, massive, massive land of opportunities. Yeah.
When you say the right friends, is that like code word for like, all right, you need somebody to kind of look after you to make sure you don't get ripped off, or just put you in the right direction instead of the wrong direction?
No, no, no. What I mean
Yeah.
by friends is just
Okay.
business partners, right?
Okay.
Not anything like tricky or shady or anything like that, but just people who understand, right? People who understand how things are done and people who can guide you and give you advice, really.
Yeah. And the reason I say, because like here in America, the politicians who get paid, let's say you're in the Congress and I'll make up a number, making $150,000 a year, and
Mhm.
somehow they end up with like 5 million, $10 million in their bank account. So they have friends who are definitely doing something for them. So that's why I was kind of curious. What is it similar to what happens over here in the U.S., where you have some questionable activities that goes on?
So this is where the cultural context come in.
Yeah,
I meant friends as in friends.
yeah.
But I think it's different in different places and different contexts.
Now, I'm curious, right? Because I really like your point about understanding the local nuances, the different business norms, the different cultures there. Because I find that in the US, everyone just assumes, or in the West even, everyone just assumes that their way of business is correct. And they seek to import their current practices, what they're already doing, their existing institutions abroad, right? And just assume that the way that they've always been doing it, or that the way that they know is the best way. And it sounds like, you know, I mean, obviously, on its face, that can't be true, right? And so, how do we help those folks kind of avoid the like harsh realities of, getting hit in the face really quickly when all of those things don't work out? If you were to go abroad and kind of walk us through that international like business context in terms of how do you learn those different norms? How do you create those different like partnerships or friends abroad without having to learn it the quote unquote hard way or the long way?
Um, it's difficult to say that there won't be lessons along the way, because there would be,
Right.
right? Regardless of if you're coming to the West or going the other way, there would be lessons along the way, right? The ones who suffer the most are the ones who don't have that open-mindedness of realizing that I'm no longer home, right? Those are the ones who suffer the most, because just like when we came here as students, as international students, we quickly realized that the rules were different, right? The weather is different. The rules are different. You have a visa, you can't work a certain number of hours. You have to do this, you have to do that. You have to go through the lottery before you become a citizen. You just have to understand those rules and making sure that you follow those rules, right? So it's exactly the same if you're going into another country, really kind of understanding, well, how do these things work here, right? So I'm a startup. I'm trying to set up shop, for example, in Kenya, because labor is lower, it's cheaper, and I want to get land that's cheaper, and I don't know, there's something there that is attractive to me, right? You wouldn't just come in and be like, okay, I'm gonna take the first contract, I'm just gonna hire the first guy. No, I think it's exactly like you would do here, right? You would have quite a number of conversations, and maybe starting out with somebody that who has told you that there is an opportunity, and then getting more and more network locally, right? If you're trying to set up your, I don't know, your shop for garments or whatever, right? Who are the best people who can provide you with that lease, for example, for your factory, right? And understanding, for example, that, oh, maybe they don't have electricity 24/7 like here, so maybe you need a generator, right? From there, who do you need to talk to get to that generator, to get to that power, right? Because obviously if the factory is not working, you're not going to be able to produce as much as you want to produce, right? Someone told you, hey, labor is very cheap, you can get all of these people, but are they the quality that you want, right? Or would they actually be that cheap to get the type of quality that you want? And the quality is there, right? Is it just the compensation that these people value? Do they value other things, right? So for example, with Flutterwave, my team members were telling me, hey, at the end of the year, the companies, the banks, they would give us a bag of rice. And I was thinking, what do you mean about it? It's very like different, from a cultural perspective. It's like, well, what is that, right? But that's something that people actually quite value, right? And so if you're now opening up a bank and you don't have that bag of rice in your structure, well, too bad, right? So it's just nuances like that really have to be taken into consideration when you're trying to set up shop in a new place. And it doesn't matter where the place is. I think it's more so your willingness and your opportunity to be open and very agile, you know?
Now, does your bank also have to deal with like KYC, anti-money laundering, sanctions, kind of a lot of the US rules? Do you mirror that, or do you have different types of
Right.
regulations?
So we have we're not a bank, right? So we're a payment technology company. However, we do onboard customers. So we do have our own KYC rules. Depending on the countries where we operate, those rules would then be very much in line with the local regulations, right? So whatever is required in Kenya and South Africa and Nigeria, that's what we really incorporate into our own processes.
So then you got to know what the rules are for all these 54 other countries, plus also international countries outside of Africa.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
lot of, that's like so much
That's
headaches. That's so much stuff, right? Like, isn't that a lot to do?
I mean, yeah, that's the way that
Yeah,
global companies
yeah.
work, right? If you're gonna be in a certain jurisdiction, you need to abide by the laws and regulations. And sometimes there may be similarities, sometimes they may be widely different, but at the end of the day, you need to abide by them, right? So, um, and again, that's why I said for the African context, it's so important to understand what is written between the lines, right? So it's not just that you've pulled the regulation from
Mhm.
the website, you've read it, and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You really need to sit down with people and understand, what does this mean? How are you guys thinking about this? And what are the actual requirements such that you don't find yourself on the wrong end of that?
Now, is that because like places like JP Morgan or Bank of America that have been doing this for so long, it's all set, but a lot of this is still new and growing in Africa. So you do have to be more careful and methodical and looking at everything. Is that it's a right as opposed to just business as usual?
So I wouldn't say JP Morgan versus Africa. I'd say the West, for
Mhm.
example, versus other places, right? So, in the US, the regulations have been here for, I don't know, hundreds of years. Everybody
Mhm.
understands what needs to happen. And I'm sure in the beginnings of it, there was a little bit of that constant evolution, just like you would see in, much younger nations like in Africa, right? JP Morgan City, they have to abide by the laws and the rules of Nigeria, of the Nigerian Central Bank. It doesn't matter who you are. Everybody has to do the same, right? And so much like them, they have to go, whether it's in China or Nigeria or South Africa, understand the regulations and then incorporate those into their processes. It's exactly like what we have to do as well, right? So we have to understand how business is done in Nigeria. We have to understand how it's done in Europe or in the US. And that's just part of being, within this financial services industry realm. It's a highly regulated industry, and those are just the rules of the game, really. Mhm.
No, just I don't
Mhm.
mean to like over flatter you, but just
Yeah.
hearing from your responses, just the empathy and the kind of personalization that you approach business with, and certainly your career with, I find it quite refreshing in terms of your take, I would say, on executive leadership.
Mm.
Can you walk us through, like the lessons learned in terms of how you've kind of built that approach or kind of developed those frameworks in your career?
Yeah, this is interesting. I think that I've been placed in different roles where I've had to lead very different types of teams, right? Um, I've been in roles where the team that I was leading had significantly more experience than me. I mean, they've been doing this for like 10, 15 years, right? Versus other teams where it's much younger. And I think with Flutterwave, we're all growing together, right? Flutterwave is doing something that no one else has done in Africa, right? So when you wake up in the morning and you grab your computer or you get into a meeting, it's not often time that you would be able to say, hey, let me call my friend. They've done this yesterday. I'm just gonna copy whatever they've done.
Mhm.
And then it's not like that, right? Nobody has
Right.
done it. Nobody has had the largest payment infrastructure in Africa. But you need to do it, right? And so there's been quite a lot of problem solving and bringing in those different views, right, into the conversations, right? So of course, I'm good with numbers. I know what needs to be done, but the Nigerian colleagues know more about Nigeria than I do, right? Or the Kenyan colleagues know more about Kenya than I do. And so bringing in those different opinions and views and ideas, I think has been super helpful for me. I've also been somebody who, over the last 4 years, I think I've had to work significantly more on leadership skills because we're remote, right? So when everybody's in the office, you say something once, everybody understands it because not only can they hear your voice, they can see you. There's a lot of, the full communication is present. But when you're not there, you really need to learn how to empathize with people, and you really need to learn how to connect with people remotely. And doing so with people you've never seen. There's people in my team that I've never seen. They're in completely different countries, that I may have never even been to, right? And so you have to constantly learn and grow as a leader, because at the end of the day, you still, everybody's still looking to you to understand the vision. Where are we going? What are we trying to do? And so from my perspective, I'd say those are the things that have really shaped my leadership model or skills, is really bringing everybody to the table and having that open-mindedness to understand that um, it's a picture that we're all drawing together.
No, I really appreciate that. And, I kind of want to dive into your personal career.
Mm.
What gave you the confidence to change disciplines from being an actuary, where it seems like you were just killing it, to, taking the leap to go to business school and then get into operations and kind of corporate finance and treasury and operations?
Mm. Um, I think I'm very adventurous, right? And I like to feel as though I'm still learning, right? I like to
Okay.
feel challenged. I like to continue to learn and grow. And so when I started out as an actuary, that was a lot of fun. It was like, wow, this is very technical. And I'm getting to learn quite a lot out of it. But at some point, I realized that if you want to run a business, you can't be just a technical person, right? And so that was a lot of the crux in terms of me making that decision to go to business school, because I had went through college, never taken like a marketing class, for example. No idea what goes on the other end of it, right? I was very focused on math. That's what I love. That's where I'm at, and that's the end of it. And so it was important for me to put myself outside of that comfort zone and learn more about holistically, what does it take to run a business, right? What are some of the things that are really important beyond just, the financials and the numbers, right? And so that was really the point in me going to business school and taking that leap of faith. Obviously, when you get into MIT, you go. I mean, there's no courage there. You just you just go. You make it happen. But it was fantastic. It was really a really fantastic experience for me to expand beyond just the actuarial box. And like I said, being able to travel, being able to, be in those trips with super talented, smart people, and get outside of my comfort zone, right? And so after business school, I think I just kind of stayed open to new opportunities, right? So when Swiss Re came and it was about, okay, you need to move to Switzerland. I'd never even been to Zurich, right? But I was just excited. I was just like, this is new. This is, it's now is the time to do it when you're young. And so I just hopped on the plane and I went to Zurich, right? And those were in the beginning quite challenging times, because it's a new country, it's a new company, trying to understand how things are done while traveling and dealing with people that you have to manage. But I don't think I don't think I've ever been faced with the greatest lesson than that, right? And so when people say, the school of life is the best school or something, that was the school of life for me, right? So, and so I'm a very adventurous person like that. I like to take on new challenges, and so far it's worked out. So
It's called like the hero's journey, where you have to leave like your home and go out in the world and investigate things seriously, and then it changes your life, and you get more confidence in yourself, and then it builds and it grows, and then you become who you are as a person. So
right.
it goes back, I think, even to the Bible, that kind of thing, right? Where that whole, I'm not sure where it's from initially,
Mm,
but a lot of people don't do that. See, that's the thing, right? A lot of people just stay in their little like cocoon that they feel safety in and don't go out of there, and then they don't learn any lessons, they don't grow and they don't develop, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's different personalities, right? Some people are just comfortable doing certain
Mhm.
things, and there's some people who never travel, for example. And then there's other people who are they're like adventurous. They're seeking out the
Mhm.
thrill, right? So I'm somewhere towards the more adventurous part of it,
Thrill
the
seeker, kind of
the thrill
almost.
seeker
Get
type
it
of
on the
things.
graph going that direction.
Exactly, right? But just genuinely, I'd say that if somebody's young and you have an opportunity to, get out there outside of what you're currently doing or outside of your country, I'd say take that opportunity because you're not gonna, once you start, you're older, you have a family, it's very hard to take those chances, right? But if you're young, this is an opportunity to not only get outside of your comfort zone and learn, but it's an opportunity to make forgivable mistakes, right? And so I'd say take those roles, take those get in there and you will figure it out, right? You will figure it out absolutely.
Wow, I'm really impressed by your response because it seems like that willingness to accept risk. In contrast, most people they want to overemphasize like almost what's called like operational excellence, right? They get lost in the weeds and the tactics, and it's almost like their way of minimizing risk, right? In terms of I'll be successful or I'll become the manager and then the director and then the VP and get promoted if I stay with a certain
Mhm.
company or if I just really focused on landing that next notch in the career ladder or building that next skill that's required in my discipline or my function.
Hmm.
But you almost you bring to your career, or at least what I'm hearing from you is almost this like strategic vision. Can you help us like understand the audience how to just balance that kind of what I'm calling operational excellence on one side with kind of a vision or a greater framework on the other side?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So for my career specifically, I'd say there's a few tenants that are just there all the time, regardless
Okay.
of where I am or what the role is, right? And that is I need to be challenged, right? I need to be excited about what I'm doing. I need to feel that I'm growing and learning, and I need to feel like I'm working with leaders that I admire, that are supporting me, right? So those things will never change, and they've never changed in every decision I've made, right? However, within that little box of my boundaries, I do allow myself to take some risks and some chances here and there, right? I was very comfortable here in Chicago when the opportunity for Swiss Re came about, right? But even my boss at the time said, take it, go for it,
Mhm.
like this is,
Wow.
and that's, and that's when you work with people who genuinely care about you being successful, right? And they're pushing you to take the next leap,
Mhm.
right? And so for me, it's always about it's gonna be tough, right? The challenges will be there. You're gonna find people that hate you or that you hate, or there's gonna be challenges. That's just part of it. But I'd always like to do it in a way that is allowing me to grow and it's allowing me to have fun, right? It would have been terrible if I was in Zurich and missing my friends and family in the cold of Zurich, and it sucked, right? And
Mhm.
I didn't learn anything. That would have been the worst. That would have been
Right.
the worst, right? And so for me, I think you need to have your non-negotiable, like we would call them, but within that context, I'd say feel free to learn, feel free to take risks, and in the grand scheme of things, when I'm 80 or whatever, I'm not going to remember that, I forgot to send that email 70 years ago and
Mhm.
It's not gonna matter. I'm gonna remember that I had so much fun traveling around the world. And so that's the way I usually think about it.
Yeah, speaking of risk, what if so someone like Rick and I, or just some entrepreneur person to go to Africa, would it be super hard to start and build something, or is the culture now becoming more westernized in the sense that they embrace entrepreneurship and there's lots of opportunities?
There's a lot of entrepreneurial opportunities in Africa. It depends on the country, the level of support, and the level of maturity of the ecosystem, right? So the ecosystem in South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, Egypt, for example, very, very developed, even Senegal as well. And what I mean by the ecosystem here, I mean things like funding, things like other people who are doing the same things that you
Mhm.
can ask advice, other entrepreneurs, right? I mean, oh, how do I set up my company, right? All of these things may be there at different levels of maturity, but they certainly are there, right? And so if somebody was to say, hey, I want to go to, Nigeria specifically, I want to solve this particular problem, for sure they'll be able to do it, for sure. Would it be easy? No. Just like it's not easy
No,
here, right?
but
But
it's
they'll
not
be
easy,
able
right? Everything's hard, right? To
but they'll
succeed,
be
it's always hard. Yeah.
Gosh. I'm so like really excited to hear about your background just because even at your level, it seems like you still focus on just continuous learning and you just have this like natural curiosity that you're still kind of using to guide you along the way. For the
Mhm.
folks that are listening, that are, the aspiring directors, the aspiring vice president, regional heads, whatever, what other tips or even tricks do you have to share for those folks that are, super ambitious and listening?
Right. Yeah, I think keep learning, right? And a lot of times when we talk about learning, people just think, oh, I just need to learn about the industry, right? It's
Okay.
not just about the industry. You need to learn the culture of the company. You need to learn, what people call politics. You need to learn the way the game is played, right? And sometimes I tell people that, everybody's playing football, you're playing basketball, it won't work, right?
Mhm.
So you need to understand, you need to understand what game is being played here, and you need to understand how to position yourself within that game, right? So definitely be an expert in whatever it is that you're in, your industry, understand it in and out, making sure that your results speak for themselves. But beyond the results, there is branding, right? There's making sure that your name is spoken in the right rooms. There's making sure that you are putting yourself out there in front of the right people, making sure that you are raising your hand for the right projects, right? With the right visibility. And so the learning is really part of all of these elements. And as you start your career, it's more about the technical aspect in the industry. And the more you evolve, these things in terms of, well, how do I manage these people? Right? How do I manage these people within this context of everybody's remote or this company culture? And these things become even more important for you, right? Who do I need to network with, right? Who needs to be in my network such that if there's a problem, for example, I'm able to call somebody at a bank somewhere and resolve it, right? Like, how do I make myself invaluable to this organization? So that's all part of the learning. And the answer is going to be different from one company to the next, but the way in which you go about it and the results that you bring to the table, that there's a consistency that needs to be there.
Wow. No, that's a good like summary. In summary, there's that consistency in terms of how you need to approach your career, right? Rather than just kind of hoping that what you're doing will be able to unlock the next part of your career. It's trying to understand these frameworks or even finding these sponsors or mentors that can kind of bring you along the way and say, hey, this is how I've done it, or this is how you need to approach it, or have you thought about this, and really kind of guiding you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
No, I really appreciate those reminders because that's why we do this show, Jack and I.
Mhm.
Jack, when he's writing for Forbes and he's sharing his advice, right? That's kind of what our goal is. And it seems like we've kind of found a kindred spirit with you, Awa. So thank you for coming on the
Thank you
show.
so much.
Thank you for having me, guys. This was a
You're
great
welcome.
conversation.